Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Dengue360. We hope that you've had a wonderful lunch and a good rest. Now to proceed with the next item in the agenda, our third speaking session for today, I would like to invite our moderator. But before I do that, please allow me to give a brief introduction. She is an esteemed member of the Faculty of Health Sciences, Department of Biomedical Science, National University of Malaysia, UKM, for the past 6 years. Her field of expertise is in anatomy and cancer research. Ladies and gentlemen, here to moderate the third speaking session entitled Analyzing the Impact of Climate and Ecological Environment, please put your hands together for Dr. Siti Fathiah Masri.
Great presentation. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming here this afternoon. It's my pleasure to welcome you here to the session 3, Climate and Ecological Environment of the DENGUE360 Innovation in Dengue Prevention. So I'm your moderator for this session. As it's stated in the agenda, we have some great speakers today. So before we start this session, let me introduce you to our first speaker, Dr. Sarah Dickens. Dr. Sarah Dickens is a research fellow at the Stockholm Environment Institute and has an interdisciplinary background with a PhD in geography and BSc in environmental science from McMaster University, Canada. Her research interests are centered on understanding how global environmental change is impacting health and well-being, particularly at the interface of water and health challenges. And today, she will be sharing with us her expert opinion on the understanding vulnerability to dengue and eco-health approach. So without further ado, I will pass this session to Dr. Dickens. Dr. Dickens, welcome. Hello, Dr. Dickens. Hello, Dr. Dickens, can you hear me? Hello?
Sarah.
Dr. Dickens, can you hear me?
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Sarah Dickens. I'm a research fellow at the Stockholm Environment Institute, and I'm sorry that I can't join you today in person. Today I'm going to be talking about the development of a vulnerability framework for dengue, using an eco-health perspective that integrates humans, health, and the environment. Recently, there have been a lot of news headlines around the world that have brought attention to the challenges in combating vector-borne disease. But this has not just been a recent phenomenon. Re-emerging and newly emerging diseases are a growing source of morbidity and mortality worldwide. For example, in addition to the spread of dengue, large outbreaks of chikungunya have been reported, and lately Zika is becoming a serious health concern. The expansion of emerging diseases, despite many control efforts, demonstrates gaps in understanding of the complexity of social and ecological systems and how these are managed to promote health. A large volume of research focuses on the characteristics of the pathogen or vector, or individual risk factors. However, disease transmission is also influenced by a range of other factors, some of which may seem less direct. To better understand diseases like dengue, we need to consider a range of determinants in the ecological and social environment. An eco-health perspective is one way to approach these challenges. The eco-health approach acknowledges inextricable links between humans and their environment, and the ways that this relationship is tied to health. Ecosystem approaches may involve a range of methodologies, but aim to improve understanding of the complex interactions that determine health. With this in mind, today I'm going to discuss research that developed a vulnerability framework for dengue in Malaysia. I'm going to start by talking about an approach at a national scale using an index and a mapping methodology. Then I'm going to focus in on a local scale using community mapping and local perceptions. In this study, vulnerability is defined as the propensity to be adversely impacted by a health hazard, and in this case, that would be dengue. And vulnerability comprises several components. Exposure conditions refer to conditions that are conducive to the presence of a dengue-carrying mosquito, or conditions that promote transmission within the environment. Susceptibility refers to cultural, social, or economic conditions that render a population sensitive to the impacts of dengue. And adaptive capacity or coping capacity refers to the ability to deal with a health threat or adapt to a hazard. This framework was used to develop an index to map vulnerability. Index approaches are used to simplify and distill complex real-world information into a format that is relevant and useful for decision-making. So this approach was not designed to be a predictive model, but to illustrate how different components of vulnerability interact. So the first step to creating this vulnerability index was a conceptual map of important system components. And so here you can see an example of this, and it might not include all important elements that you might consider relevant, but it shows a range of aspects in the human environment and the natural environment. So based on this conceptual map, a range of data were identified for the index based on what kind of information were available in Malaysia and what was accessible. Next, using thresholds that were identified from the literature, so thresholds identified from modeling studies, thresholds were used to normalize each factor between 0 and 1. Then these were incorporated into an index. So here we can see the different factors that were used to create the vulnerability index. And for the sake of this analysis, the lack of coping capacity was combined into susceptibility. So we can see a range of components, including climate factors, as well as aspects in the social environment. And here we can see in more detail some of the thresholds that were used based on information identified in the literature. And this was to normalize the factors that went into the index between 0 and 1 so that they could be combined together. So here we can see for the exposure component, we have population density, land use, and temperature and precipitation. For susceptibility and lack of coping capacity, here we can see age under 15, type of housing quality, water and sanitation, healthcare access, which is linked to adaptive capacity, and education level. So all of these components were combined to visualize areas of vulnerability. And as I mentioned, this was not designed as a predictive tool, but to highlight interactions between different factors that may not be considered together. So now I'll show some examples of the index outputs. So here we can see two maps for exposures showing seasonal changes. And this information that was used was an average of climate conditions. So it doesn't represent one particular year, but what would be considered normal conditions. So here we can see a seasonal trend based on the thresholds that were used for the climate factors. Next, for susceptibility, we can see higher susceptibility in red in eastern Malaysia. We can see low susceptibility in Kuala Lumpur and the surrounding region. So next, these components were combined together to visualize vulnerability within Malaysia. And again, here we can see 2 points during the year, so we can see a seasonal trend. We can see that vulnerability increases from 0 to 1, so the red areas are higher vulnerability, the blue areas are lower vulnerability. So areas with high exposure and high susceptibility resulted in the highest overall vulnerability, and these may represent areas for prioritizing planning. Urban environments, especially in the Kuala Lumpur region, are highlighted as vulnerable areas. The seasonal comparison between 2 points in the year also highlights changes in vulnerability due to seasonal trends in climate patterns. And based on the thresholds that were used in this study, we can see that in eastern Malaysia there's heavy rainfall for several months during the year, and this may impact mosquito breeding sites and wash them away. In drier months, exposure in this region actually increases, and this is possibly due to more moderate rainfall, which is conducive to larger mosquito populations. So when this is combined with higher susceptibility, this results in higher vulnerability during this point in the year. In contrast, some areas in Malaysia have consistently low vulnerability. This is due to low exposure, so areas like forested areas, which are not favorable for the Aedes vectors, as well as areas with low population density. We can also see some areas which have zero vulnerability, and this is observed in areas where temperatures are too low to be conducive to mosquito survival, and this is confined to mountainous regions in central Malaysia. But of course, these regions could shrink with warming temperatures. So this type of index approach could be modified using different thresholds from modeling results. And it has been used in other case studies to look at changes over long periods of time, so over 10 years, for instance, to understand how trends in vulnerability are changing. It has also been used to include climate model information to understand how vulnerability might change in the future. So while this national level vulnerability assessment highlights the importance of exposure and how it interacts with susceptibility and lack of coping capacity, it's also important to understand vulnerability at a local scale. Dengue control is a shared challenge for residents because while someone may maintain their property to reduce exposure to the disease, mosquito breeding sites may be found in neighboring houses or public spaces. So now I'm going to discuss an approach to examine local level vulnerability. So the aim here was to apply a local scale mapping approach to identify spatial perceptions of vulnerability to dengue and mosquito breeding areas. Local understanding was compared in 2 different Malaysian communities and was combined to create maps to facilitate community-based and municipal decision-making. The study involved meetings with stakeholders to discuss the project, including public health officials working on vector control, researchers, and community leaders who were interested in the project. So the study took place in 2 locations, Putrajaya, which is a planned city established in the 1990s and with a large amount of landscaped gardens, artificial lake, and wetlands. The second location was in Seremban, which is a more traditional Malaysian city. So community mapping groups were formed in Putrajaya and Seremban, and they were divided into groups of men and women, and this was to encourage gender equity and participation. And residents who participated were asked to draw their local environments and to highlight areas they associated with dengue or mosquito breeding. and then participants were asked to discuss the features on the map to enrich the information found in a spatial format. Next, digital copies were made of the maps, and then information was georeferenced onto a base map. So this process allowed areas identified by participants to be better shared by others looking at the maps, and it also puts the information into the context of surrounding features and areas. And in this format, the information can also be used in other types of GIS analysis. In both Putrajaya and Seremban, residents had a keen understanding of areas where mosquitoes might be breeding in the community. The process of drawing sketch maps highlighted features of interest to community members, rather than containing all aspects or geographic elements. So now I'm going to briefly discuss some of the findings from the mapping process. So here we can see some of the georeference information that was generated by participants in Seremban. And here we can see areas associated with dengue highlighted in red. In Seremban, waste contributed to waste was identified by participants as an important area, which was not a problem in Putrajaya, and this was due to greater garbage removal in the city. In Seremban, groups of empty houses were mapped by participants, and these were reported as places where mosquitoes might breed due to lack of upkeep. There were also areas including empty stores, a stream area that was blocked, a schoolyard, and back alleys between houses, which were linked to dengue because of waste building up, such as used tires. And although construction is not widespread in Seremban, participants reported that foreign workers involved in an upgrade of the sewage system at the time were not aware of the dengue problems, and so they did not properly dispose of plastic containers that could accumulate water. So this highlighted the need for greater community cohesion in Seremban to increase the adaptive capacity to deal with dengue. So this map shows areas in Putrajaya, so associated with, which were perceived to be dengue vulnerable areas. Construction projects, which were frequently occurring in Putrajaya since it was established, were associated with dengue by participants. Several of these sites included residential building sites, as well as abandoned construction sites, due to unmaintained barrels found on these sites, which could potentially accumulate water. Next to the mall, there was a large shipping and construction storage area that residents reported may also permit mosquito breeding. And in contrast to these areas, participants also reported that vegetated areas, flowers, trees, and parks may also contribute to dengue breeding. And this is interesting because the idea behind the large green spaces in Putrajaya is to create a healthy environment. But participants mapped some of these areas and linked them to mosquitoes. In newer areas of Putrajaya, participants also noted that there are less combi programs or campaigns, so cleanup activities to encourage residents to remove domestic mosquito breeding sites compared to more established areas of the city. And this again shows a role for community cohesion in fighting dengue transmission. Due to frequent rainfall in the region, drainage systems were highlighted as an area of concern in both Putrajaya and Seremban. Drains in the neighborhood were identified in housing areas, especially back alleys and around apartment buildings. The open drains could become trapped with vegetation in the case of Putrajaya or garbage in the case of Seremban, which blocks water flow. A limitation to this approach was that it emphasized the outside environment, and the inside environment is of course also very significant for dengue. Some participants were aware of this and reported areas inside the home, but this was not the focus of the methodology. These kind of spatial perceptions of potential breeding sites have the potential to improve vector control plans. Firstly, they may highlight areas that have been overlooked by regular control activities, but they may also identify areas for further education or awareness building. So areas where there might be discrepancy in perceptions between residents and vector control officials, there may be opportunity to target awareness building messages. And this also demonstrates a more involved role for community members in vector surveillance and a need for greater two-way information exchange between communities and vector control staff. So the findings from this study and comparing between the two communities show that there are differences between Seremban and Putrajaya, even though they are not that far, both cities are not that far from the capital in Kuala Lumpur. So this shows that one approach that's used for vector control in one area might not be appropriate for all contexts, even within Malaysia. So a vector control approach or awareness building strategy may need to be context specific for a particular town or region. There is growing interest in understanding how environmental change and social change is impacting health. So there's a lot of opportunities to continue this kind of work and to better understand the interactions between humans, the environment, and health. Two potential opportunities building off of these studies that I discussed today. Firstly, at a local level, there are opportunities to involve community members in citizen science to help public authorities with their work in vector surveillance. So this could help to increase knowledge of breeding sites among community members and provide a way to target awareness messages and improve vector control activities. At a larger scale, there's opportunity to use future scenarios and development projections. This could be social development scenarios as well as climate change models. And this can help us understand how vulnerability is changing and how it will change in the future in order to respond. So that concludes my presentation today, and I'd like to thank you for your attention. I'd also like to thank the United Nations University for supporting this work. So thank you very much, and I'm open to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Dickens, for the great presentations. So now I will open the question and answer session from the audience. Any questions? Okay.
Yes, could you approach the microphone, please? Thank you.
Hello, Dr. Dickens. Thank you for your presentation. I'm Shubhankar Biswal, and I'm a student of sustainability. And we study sustainability from a variety of perspectives. Studying it from, looking at it from the angle of dengue is definitely new to me. So my question is, what is the attitude of the international community towards like research institutions or funding agencies towards pouring in more resources towards looking at sustainability from the angle of health and dengue, or generally from the health and disease angle? Am I audible? Hello?
Dr. Dickens, can you hear the questions? Dr. Dickens? Minister, can you go to the stage and present your question here?
Okay, sure.
Okay.
Hello, am I audible? I think she got disconnected. Hello. The participants show only one person, Jeremy. I think she's disconnected.
Okay, just repeat the question.
Hello.
Front to the camera.
Hello. Am I audible, Dr. Dickens?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. My question is, we look at sustainability from a variety of angles, mostly energy and climate change. So what is the attitude of the international community, mostly research organizations and funding agencies, towards pouring in resources to study sustainability from the health angle? So what is the attitude of the international community, mostly research organizations and funding agencies, towards pouring in resources to study sustainability from the health angle?
That's a good question. I think there has been growing interest recently in, oh, let me just turn off the live stream for a second. There's been recent interest in understanding the links between health and sustainability. Traditionally, health approaches have been very focused on individual risk factors. That's been the traditional type of health study relating to dengue or other types of health issues. But we're increasingly realizing that there are opportunities to understand how environmental change conditions and social change conditions impact health. So a new type of health research that has been proposed is called planetary health. And you can see here the logo and also a small description. And this was launched by the Lancet, the leading medical journal, as well as a range of funders who are interested in this kind of research. So I think it's been a growing area of interest, and I think that there will only be more opportunities in the future to look at these kind of linkages between health and sustainability. So it's a really exciting time to be looking at these kind of issues. However, it is, of course, challenging to understand how these complex interactions between social and ecological systems are impacting health. It presents challenges in terms of methodologies, analytical approaches, and it really requires collaboration between different disciplines and between different sectors. So between people involved looking at the environmental aspects, social aspects, economic aspects, that really need to work together in order to understand these kind of complex issues.
Thank you.
Thank you. So any questions from the audience?
Dr. Fatia, perhaps we could take one more before we move on to the next one.
Okay, only one more question from the audience. Okay, Dr. Dickens, I would like to ask you one question. I just want to know, how long have you been doing this research? Dr. Dickens? Hello, Dr. Dickens, can you hear me? Hello, Dr. Dickens. I would like to know how long have you been doing this eco-health approach research?
We are connected with Dr. Dickens, who is live in Sweden right now, so probably dia ikut jalan jauh sikit.
Dr. Dickens, do you want me to repeat the question?
So the question is, how long have we been doing eco-health research?
Yes.
I'm not sure if that refers to me in particular or to the global community. But eco-health research is a growing area. It has been around for a few decades, actually, because it's been recognized as an important way to understand these kind of linkages between humans and the environment, and how this impacts health. So a lot of work has been done at a local scale. There have been particular regional foci on using eco-health approaches. There has been a bit of work on an eco-social bio approach within Southeast Asia. There's also been a lot of work using eco-health in Latin America. And it's been a popular approach in Canada as well. So I wouldn't say that it is being applied everywhere, but it has been growing in importance, and actually linked to an eco-health approach is another community of researchers that have kind of converged together called One Health. And One Health looks at linkages, again, between the environment, humans, and animals, actually. So looking at that, how those kind of linkages are impacting health. So both One Health and eco-health, which is also known as ecosystem approaches to health, have they've been applied for the last few decades, but they're definitely growing because of increasing interest in understanding environmental and health linkages, and needing ways to deal with the complex interactions that we can find. So I hope that answers your question. If you want to clarify it a little bit more, I can add more detail.
It's okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Dickens. Okay, now, without further ado, I would like to welcome our second. Okay, thank you, Dr. Dickens, for your great presentations. I hope the audience here will gain great info about an eco-health approach in dengue. So without further ado, I would like to welcome our second presenter, Dr. Desi Baharaja. But before that, let me introduce a little bit background information of our second presenter. Dr. Desi Baharaja is attached with Ministry of Health, Malaysia. He completed his Master in Public Health and is currently pursuing Doctor of Public Health in University of Malaysia, Sarawak. Dr. Desi has invented multiple artificial intelligence health programs in Malaysia, and he had also won first prize in both big data analytics by MDEC, IBM, and Microsoft, as well as global impact competition by Genovasi. Dr. Desi was sponsored by Google and ECM Libra Foundation to Singularity University in National Aeronautic and Space Administration, NASA, in Silicon Valley, California. Dr. Desi also co-founded an AIME that has the capability to identify deadly outbreaks 1 month in advance and geolocating them up to 400-meter radius. And today, Dr. Desi will be sharing with us his expert opinion on the artificial intelligence in medical epidemiology. So with that, I hope that you will give your full attention to Dr. Desi. So welcome Dr. Desi to the stage.
Hi everyone. Good evening. Or is it good afternoon? Good afternoon. And to our Brazilians, bem-vindo para Malaysia, obrigado. And we shall start now itself. I'll be speaking more on, I think I'll use a cordless mic. It's easier. Just one. Okay, yeah. So I'll be speaking more on the use of artificial intelligence in medical epidemiology. So I think it's a known fact that things are moving very disruptively, be it in finance, in logistics, but we don't see much of innovations, even with the title innovations in dengue prevention lately. So this is one of the reasons why we have embarked in a journey on training machines to understand how data actually really behaves. So there's a lot of people, I mean, there's many agencies speaking about big data, but do we actually really understand what this big data is all about, or is it just a trend to speak about big data? We have seen how memory chips evolve. Since 1956, a 5 megabyte, which will cost you about 120,000 US dollars, was fit in a plane. And today we have seen in 2014, 128 gigabyte is just $99. So things are getting better, smaller, and cheaper. That's according to the Moore's law. And speaking about even handphones, mobile phones, we have seen how things have evolved. For example, like iPhone. And we have seen how Uber has disrupted taxi, Google has disrupted the libraries, Craigslist, Skype, long-distance call, and etc. So again, my question, what about healthcare? So I'd like to just share with you, they say the top bottom specialist or discipline that is adopting data science or even AI is medicine actually. Basically, if you zoom in, you'll see preventive medicine or public health is the least that has been using this technology. So why is it so difficult to use technology to solve our problem? Or why is it so difficult to curb diseases? Because one of the reasons, I mean, based on my own experience, I've realized that there is a limitation to statistical modeling, meaning that regression cannot really help you to solve a lot of issues. But machine learning or deep learning will allow you to solve at a very dynamic phase, meaning that at a very live, real-time kind of results. And I think that's what we want. And bear in mind that healthcare is not like other businesses or other domains. Even Barry Silverman said the complexity of modern medicine exceeds the inherent limitations of the unaided human mind. So as a doctor, I probably think there's only 5 symptoms to cause, one particular disease. But after imputing various variables of patient's symptoms, patient's physiological profile, blood profile, we realize that there's not just the 5 symptoms that is important there. There's more than that they are involved in this scenario. So that is the reason why I emphasize on machine learning and trying to train machine with our data that we have today. So some people think that, or some people believe that artificial intelligence will definitely help humans. Like we have seen the Google car, right? Self-driving car. Well, some people think that artificial intelligence will destroy human. Like I think most of you realize that when you snap a photo, Facebook asks you immediately, right? Like, would you like to upload this photo? So these are all based on AI algorithms actually that works at the back end to understand your profile and what you are doing. And I'm sure some of you, like when you when you are engaged or when you share your baby photos, you get baby products, right? So these are all algorithms running at the back end of social media. So what we are trying to do is we are trying to shift those algorithms to healthcare. And I'm a strong believer that definitely technology is the catalyst for change. Why? Because we have seen how abundance through technology has, of course, increased the human life expectancy, has reduced the infant mortality and even maternal mortality. So now, the main question of our topic today, what about outbreaks? How are we going to handle outbreaks? So we have to understand that as a doctor, we are paid to treat, rarely to prevent. So that's why you see there's rich gynecologists, rich surgeons, but you don't see very rich epidemiologists or public health physicians, right? So this is a very big challenge in the global arena we see. So that was one of the reasons why, thanks to the World Bank and NASA and even few government agencies in Brazil, that they saw this opportunity and they saw the needs of moving to big data and machine learning in healthcare. We have seen how diseases are spreading tremendously. I mean, speak about flu, it killed more than 30 million people, and we have seen how Ebola immediately killed more than about 10,000 people. So that is one of the reasons why in AMI, or Artificial Intelligence Medical Epidemiology, we believe that we should start somewhere. And since I'm a Malaysian, I thought let's start with dengue. So that's the reason why we started with dengue. So I'll share a bit of my experience. We started the dengue project in Malaysia with a project called Dengue Index. When it was recognized by IBM and Microsoft, we moved on to a competition by Genovasi, whereby it's a global impact competition. Winning that competition has enabled me to go to Singularity University. It's a very beautiful university. I mean, really, it was really beautiful to see how can we incorporate or converge medicine, computer engineering, molecular biology, and etc. So that is one of the reasons why I feel that it opened the door in terms of AI in medicine. Secondly, in Singularity University, we won top 5 in the US, whereby we got a grant from Brazil government as well as from the US government called FIX. It's called Field Innovation Exchange Program, whereby we actually went to Brazil and we helped the city of Rio as well as in São Paulo to predict those dengue outbreaks area, which I will share in a bit. So yeah, that was the story of why we started dengue. It's not bragging, okay? It's just some history for you guys. So okay, let's speak about dengue. I think everyone spoke about dengue. So basically, 400 million dengue cases are reported annually. I believe it's more. And we see that about 2.5 billion people are currently at risk of dengue. And it is estimated that $1,591 are actually spent for each dengue cases. And speaking about the economical impact, we have seen about $440 million are actually spent just to fight dengue per country. This is by WHO. And in Brazil, for instance, they have spent about $1.3 billion just to fight this disease. And India, it cost them also about $1 billion. So you can see it's important to speak about money first, then you will get funding, you know. If you speak about the disease first, no one is going to fund you. I think someone from the sustainable was asking the question, right? How do you get fund from, you know, big organizations? So sadly, you got to think like a businessman, then you think like a scientist. Then you'll get your funding done. Okay? So why did we came up with an AI system? Because we believe when you do not know when an outbreak happens, you tend to have unplanned management. Bear in mind that 43 to 53% of dengue prevention are spent on fogging and etc., which is really sometimes goes to a waste because it's more towards a nationwide campaign. and genetically modified mosquitoes. We have discussed with few professors, even in FGV, I think our Brazilians here know, yeah, in FGV, that they told us that sometimes when we don't know when and where there's an outbreak happen, we tend to release these mosquitoes in the wrong areas. So that even contributes to a higher cost, because approximately it costs you about 7 to 6 euros. So that was one of the reasons why. And fogging and larviciding, and everyone knows, and health campaigns. We love health campaigns, right? So we spend a lot on health campaigns. So that was one of the reasons why I thought that, okay, see, in order to solve this, we really need to know when and where exactly. So bear in mind, this is a global, stats by the Asia Pacific dengue response. They said worldwide, our current response is still passive, meaning that we do fogging, we do larviciding, we do whatever interventions we do today is only when an outbreak happens. Only when there is hotspots, we do it. There is only 3.9% of active. Active means that you try to predict, but by simulation, by probably regression analysis, and etc. So sadly, even Bill Gates said, the next outbreak, we are definitely not ready. So we are trying to get some money from him too, from Bill and Melinda Gates. Yeah. So these are few things that the world is sharing. So that is the reason why we introduced Amy. So okay, how does Amy actually work? So we have approximately more than 20 variables. When we initially started, we have about 100 over variables. So we actually trained, we call her Amy, because American loves name, like Kevin, Amy, like for an AI system, So we call her Amy. So she's okay. So we have imputed more than 100 over variables, and now Amy understands that only 23 variables are important for Malaysia. But for Brazil, they said, no, it's not 23, it's more than 100 variables. So these are so interesting things that machine can actually tell you. So we took weather data such as wind speed, wind direction, thunderstorm, solar radiation, and in terms of construction site, we use image recognition to recognize types of building, high-rise building, low-rise building, condominiums, and etc. Because it's important to get all these single details. And of course, health, dengue cases, and etc. So for Malaysia, we actually use the Bayesian network in order to make the machine understand on what are the costs or what are the variables needed in order to determine whether there is an outbreak or not. So if you see here, we even included population density, which was very, very difficult to get data in Malaysia. It's really difficult. So we got a call, few agencies and etc. to actually get the population density in order to train Amy to understand that, okay, this area in Selangor, this is the population density and etc. For example, for weather, we use 44 weather stations to actually gather all those weather data points. And like I've said earlier, we took lake, house, we took everything in order to actually understand which exact variables that we actually needed. So these are few of the modeling that we see in Brazil. This one is we actually specially tested somewhere in Brazil. And these are the cross analysis we have done. Currently, our model is successfully, it's about 87 to 88% accuracy. But for Brazil, we only had about 84%. And bear in mind, if you look through literatures, right, you've seen that humidity, temperature, and rainfall is something common. And I don't know why people still do research on that, because it's redundant. We know that these are the factors that causes dengue. But through machine learning, which we will be publishing end of this month, I'll share with you before it's been published, we realized the thunderstorm, I don't know why, we have not concluded why, but we realized thunderstorm and solar radiation contributes to dengue hotspot. But again, I don't know why. Our team is still investigating that. So this is for Malaysia, actually 23 data sets exactly. This is basically the back end. We use Weka to actually to extrapolate which are the areas. That means if week one with this duration, with this wind speed, with this thunderstorm, what is the probability? So bear in mind, it gives you actually live feed, live data. So as public health physicians, I think at the end of the day, you don't want to be gathering data, running your SPSS or whatever software, waiting for your report to, to be produced and then take action. So it's important that you have something like Facebook where when I log in, I can see updates. Someone is actually having MACD today, so this area is having outbreak. Probably in 2 weeks, another area will be having outbreak. So that's what we actually want it to be. So these are the prototypes.